Government that not fulfill the constitutional obligation to secure the Nigerian people, to provide for the welfare of the Nigerian people, we have to be kicked out of office, out of power. You can't have a democracy without, where you have people languishing in custody. Following the Endsars protest last year, which the government has repeatedly maintained was a just protest, the central bank, without seeking proper advice, approached the Federal High Court for another ex parte and gave the impression to the court that he needed 180 days to investigate the leaders of the Endsars protesters for money laundering and terrorism. The court said, no, I will only grant you 90 days. And the court granted 90 days. For the period of the ex parte, or while the ex parte order lasted, none of the Endsars protested was investigated for any criminal offense whatsoever. By, last week, that is on the 4th of February, the order expired. Hence, when we appeared in court today, I did submit that the order had expired, and that was the end of the case. The governor of the central bank, Chief Michael Andraka SAN, agreed that the order had expired, and so the court formally lifted the order and directed the banks to unfreeze the accounts of the Endsars protesters. For me, as a lawyer, perhaps more than any Nigerian, it is an irony, and for me, I have agonized over the collapse of values in our country, particularly the gross abuse of the rule of law and human rights. Last year, the State Security Service obtained a similar ex parte order to investigate Mr. Omoyele Sowore for terrorism. At the end of the day, there was no scintilla of evidence linking the gentleman with terrorism. What I say that is very painful for me is the fact that throughout the dark days of military dictatorship in Nigeria, our accounts were never frozen, even for one day. At that time, the central bank was manned by professionals, professional bankers. That bank never approached any court to freeze our accounts because we were fighting military dictators. We were detained on several occasions, routinely. We were detained routinely under the obnoxious State Security of Person Decree No. 2 of 1984, which ousted the jurisdiction of the courts. But Nigerian judges ensured that we secured our liberty on every occasion. In desperation, the military dictators charged us with sundry offenses, including treasonable felony, for having the temerity to challenge their corrupt practices and gross human rights abuse. Again, our courts admitted us to bail in very liberal terms. Our passports were regularly impounded and confiscated by the National Security Organization, NSO, now State Security Service. Again, on each occasion, the courts ordered that our passport be returned to us. I'm therefore going to appeal to our judges to reject all ex parte applications by the central bank and the State Security Service for the seizure of the bank accounts of activists, for the detention of activists, so that the point I'm making is that when such applications are made, our court should order the applicant to go and put their opponents on notice, so that the court will be given the opportunity to see the futility of frivolous applications on the basis of which the accounts of innocent Nigerians are frozen. I mean, how can you say that I have the right to protest for enjoying, for exercising my freedom of expression through protest? You not seize my account. It's contradictory. But it's for Nigerians to demand that their rights be respected under the law. Because by virtue of Section 94 of the Electoral Act 2010 as amended, and Section 83 of the Police Act 2020, the Nigerian Police Force has been given a duty, mandatory duty, to provide adequate security for protesters in Nigeria. So I expect the police, whenever there is a protest, to provide adequate security and not to allow so-called hoodlums to hijack protests, so that you can prevent mayhem by government thugs and private thugs, as witnessed last year. Because contrary to the campaign of the government that hoodlums hijacked the protest last year, it was the government that hijacked the protest. Because in Abuja and Lagos, thugs, higher thugs, unleashed violence on unarmed protesters. And this was shown on television throughout the whole world. In fact, the Endsars protesters arrested some of them and handed them over to the police, but as usual, none of the criminal elements was charged before the court. So, this is the position. So, Nigerians have the right to protest. That right has been recognized. President Buhari has repeatedly maintained being a beneficiary of freedom of expression through protest himself. President Buhari has considered the right of Nigerians to protest. Having considered the right to protest, the government has a duty to ensure that unarmed protesters are protected by the government. Since the government was not willing to do that, the law has now imposed a duty on the police to do that. So it's no longer tolerable to say that hoodlums have hijacked a protest. Why did you allow the protest to be hijacked? But there's no way I am going to give up my rights because there are criminal elements instigated to prevent me from enjoying the right to freedom of expression. The neo-colonial regime in Nigeria is built on violence and sustained by violence on a daily basis. The armed forces embark on extrajudicial killing of Nigerians, whether in Zaria or in Port Harcourt or in Enugu or wherever. The police equally engage in the extrajudicial killing of Nigerians. So it is not when criminal elements embark on violence that you talk of violence. Official violence is worse because it is perpetrated in the name of the state and with the resources of the country. So, it should not surprise anybody that a violent government is extending pardon to violent groups. You are dealing with violent groups, official violent groups and private violent groups. So I am not in any way taken aback. I'm not flabbergasted that amnesty is extended, that a violent government extends amnesty to violent groups. I mean, when a state has collapsed, as it is the case in Nigeria, whereby the government has lost the monopoly of violence to criminal gangs, what do you expect? Where law and order have broken down irretrievably, the government has no choice but to negotiate with violent groups. That's what is going on. The way forward is for the Nigerian people to seize the initiative, take their political destiny in their own hands, and ensure that Section 14 of the Constitution, which provides that the security and welfare of the Nigerian people shall be the primary purpose of government. Any government that does not fulfill the constitutional obligation to secure the Nigerian people, to provide for the welfare of the Nigerian people, we have to be kicked out of office, out of power. So Nigerians have a duty to organize and mobilize themselves, to put in place a government that will defend them, that will protect them, and that will provide for their welfare.